Hello there, everybody out there in the UK content land. I'm here with Lucy Atkins to talk about her latest paperback book. As you can see in the middle there, it's Magpie Lane. So if you could tell us a bit about the plot, please.
Okay, so Magpie Lane is set in an Oxford college, and at the very beginning of the book, the 8-year-old daughter of the president of an Oxford college has gone missing, and the Oxford police are interviewing the nanny about her time with this family and trying to get a picture of what the family life has been like in this ancient, beautiful, spooky master's lodging. And the nanny is a 40-something Scottish woman called Dee, who is very, very clever and a little bit awkward. And as the police ask her questions, we're getting her memories of what it's been like living with this family for about, I think she's been there 7 months, can't remember. Yeah. I should remember that, but actually Magpie Lane was first published over a year ago. So yeah. Some of the details have gone a bit hazy. So she's basically painting a picture of a family that on the outside look incredibly glamorous, but actually a very troubled, difficult child, a very troubled and difficult father who is this very powerful academic and the president of this college, which is a bit of a nest of vipers. So it's a sort of picture of Oxford life and a mystery about what's happened to this child, who's done something, has she just wandered off, has she run away, has someone taken her?
What made you go for maths as the background to the Oxford side of it? Because there's loads of subjects you could have chosen, but maths is...
Well, maths is... I tend to find people who do things that I could never do, I tend to find the most interesting. So in my previous book, it was a scientist who specialised in beetles. And in this book, so the nanny, Dee, is actually quietly a mathematical genius, and she herself, could have actually been an Oxford academic, and all of this will sort of gradually emerge, this talent she has for maths and really for thinking and problem solving. And I like the idea that in maths there's this thing called a proof, which high-level mathematicians spend sometimes their whole lives trying to figure out the answer to this proof. And of course in mysteries, you want to find the proof of who did something, who's guilty, and sometimes there is no proof and there is no answer, and it's just stories that people are telling, and which story is the right story. And of course, as a writer, the thing that interests me most is the stories.
Yeah, there's lots of little stories in this. The key one is the relationship between the nanny and the child. Why do you think that was the story that is empathise with people that I've read in reviews? Why do you think that?
Well, I think the story, what I wanted was a sense, so the child, her name's Felicity, and she has lost her mother. When she was very little, her mother has died. That's not a spoiler because we do know that quite early on. And her father, who is Nick Law, the president of this college, and he used to work for the BBC, and he's incredibly glamorous and powerful. And he has sort of struggled to parent this little girl. And he's been so busy, and he's remarried, and his new Danish wife is young and she's pregnant, and she can't really cope with the child either. And Felicity has always been selectively mute. So it's not a trauma response, it's just a kind of anxiety disorder that she's got. So she doesn't really speak. And this not speaking has got more and more acute, so that she's literally not speaking pretty much to anyone by the time Dee, the Scottish nanny, arrives in the president's lodging. And Dee herself is an outsider and someone who uses silence a lot. And I was really interested in this relationship between the nanny and the child that is really founded on what's not said, because the child doesn't really speak, and Dee has to fill in the gaps, and yet they form this really powerful bond, because they're the two outsiders inside this institution, inside this creepy house, and inside this dysfunctional family. So I was really interested in that, this kind of deep bond that has formed and gradually forms, and the trust that begins to form between the two of them, even though there aren't really very many words.
Yeah. What was it about Oxford as a background? I know that you've got a quite close connection with Oxford, but you described it really well.
Well, for years I resisted writing about Oxford, because it's a sort of, in a way, it's a bit of a cliche to have a mystery set in an Oxford college. And I was really aware that there's this, it's almost a genre in its own right, the Oxford novel. And I felt I wasn't really sure I'd be able to do it justice. And I knew that if I was going to approach it, I'd have to do something really different with it and treat it quite creatively, engaging with the fact that it is this trope, that you've got layers and layers of literature that you're dealing with when you decide to write a novel in Oxford. So I kind of brought in a lot about Oxford's artistic and literary heritage, and the idea that when you walk through the streets of Oxford, the geography of Oxford, you're walking in the footsteps of all of these amazing, great thinkers and writers and poets. And Dee, my character, sort of slightly engages in that, because she forms a friendship with a historian called Linklater, who again is an outsider, but he's a sort of academic. He's very steeped in the history of Oxford and in the ghosts of Oxford. And I wanted to sort of explore this idea that Oxford is full of ghosts, and not necessarily kind of spooky ones that jump out of you in dark alleyways, although there are some of those, but really, the ghosts of all the writers and the stories and the books that have gone before you, and literally the people who walk down the same streets you're walking down.
Yeah, you did go into, as you say, quite a lot of the famous names in Oxford and literature. What's the one that you enjoyed researching or reading again for the book?
I just did so much reading. I did a lot of research. Funnily enough, I did a lot of research for a plot line that in the end was tiny. So there was a sort of historical plot of previous residents of this 400-year-old house, and it involved a poisoning and a falsely accused person. And I actually did a lot of reading about Edwardian Oxford and nannies and things like that, and I loved all of that. So I'm sort of maybe thinking that's stored away for the future. It ended up being a storyline, but quite a small one.
Is that where the idea for Linklater came from? Because what you just described is mainly Linklater as a character, isn't it?
Well, Linklater came because I have a good friend. I live in Oxford, and I have a good friend here who is she's a house detective. So her job is to go to people hire her to go to their house and do house history. So she looks into all of the people that have lived in your house and the changes that have been made to it. And I just thought that was a really interesting role for somebody within a book like this to have, because there's so much in the book about the history of this creepy house. And it's actually an Edwardian, Elizabethan house, and it was built with a priest's hole where they used to hide the Catholic priests. And there's this sense of years and years of history layered up in this creepy house, and the echoes of all of that. And I thought having a house historian as one of the main characters was a really good way in to that sense of history within the house itself, and a way to kind of bring some really fun, creepy stories out. So Linklater, my house detective, is also a ghost tour operator. So he takes groups of tourists after dark around the streets of Oxford, telling them ghost stories. And he likes to tell ghost stories to Felicity, who, being 8 years old, loves them. And Dee, the nanny, worries that she's going to get freaked out by them.
Did you go on any ghost tours when you researching the book, or?
Of course, I went on 2, and actually I got one of my best pieces one of my best sort of pieces of perspective actually came from one of the ghost tours that I went on, where the tour operator, whose name is Bill Spector, and he does these theatrical ghost tours around Oxford. And I was chatting to him at the end when everyone had gone, and I asked him, what kind of people are coming on these ghost tours, and he said, actually, after almost every single ghost tour he does, and he's been doing it for 30 years or something, and he said, somebody always comes up to me and tells me a story of a beloved loved one that they've lost who has appeared to them in ghost forms. And then he said, we see ghosts because we need to see them. And I used that in the book because I think that idea that on some level, it's probably not an apparition, but it's come from your subconscious, and you're seeing somebody because you love them and miss them and want them to still be alive sometimes, which is a theme in the book, grief and loss.
The themes of this book, with so many stories in it, is really interesting, because you could have offshoots of quite probably Linklater could have his own book, or any of the other characters could possibly have been offshoots in earlier or later. Is there any stuff you've learned from your previous 3 books that you brought into this one?
That's a really good question, and I think books are a real progression. For me, each book takes me longer to write, and with each book I try and push myself in a different way. And I think probably what I really learned from The Night Visitor was to follow things that really interest me, even if I think on the surface of it they're not going to interest anyone else, like the maths stuff, which seems, on the surface like it's going to be incredibly boring to have anything to do with maths in a novel. But of course you can use it in different, you don't use it in a boring way. So I think that's one thing I did realize, is that if I'm going to write a book that is more powerful and more authentic, I've got to follow what the threads that I'm interested in.
Yeah, what you're talking about using maths, was that why you started the book with the bridge? The
mathematical bridge, that I don't, funnily enough, I don't really know whether I chose to start it on the mathematical bridge because of the maths themes, but it just fitted perfectly, because I don't really write in a linear way. I jump around when I'm writing. I write things and I go in one direction, then I go in another, and then I rewrite. So the sentence that actually was initially the first sentence of the book is now maybe chapter 8 or something. So I write backwards and forwards. But the mathematical bridge, I always knew it was a story. It was always going to be a central image. It's a bridge in Oxford, it's built in a really intricate way using wood, and the mythology of it is that there are no nuts and bolts. There's nothing holding it up except for maths, and that some students tried to take it apart, couldn't take it apart. Couldn't put it back together again, and then the nuts and bolts had to be used. And that's actually just a piece of mythology. And in fact, the Oxford Bridge is just a copy of a bridge in Cambridge, which is much older. So it was like this image of layers of stories and lies and fabrications around this idea that everything is being held up by maths, which is something nobody normal can understand.
Given that you've got a background in literature and you teach creative writing, is there anything that you've learned from your students that you would advise a prospective writer to follow?
I learn from my students all the time. That's one of the things I really love about teaching. I teach master's students, so they're often people who have lived before they've decided to come and study creative writing. They're not necessarily fresh out of school. And so I learn all the time from them in various ways, because there's such a variety of students. And I think one of the things that it really does for me, their sort of passion and persistence is what strikes me every time. That how deeply they want to be writers and how much they care about it. And it makes me feel really privileged to do what I do, not just to be able to write novels, but actually to be able to spend time with them, helping them to do their best work. So I think it's probably, there are lots of little lessons all the time, little stylistic lessons and approaches to things that I learn all the time. But generally, it's a really good reminder for me.
When you said earlier that you don't write linearly yourself, how is that? What do your students think of that, and how do you discuss that when you're doing it in lectures? Because it must be awkward to explain.
Well, I don't tend to do lectures, so that's a good thing, because it is quite hard to constructively explain that to somebody. But I supervise master's students. Yeah. I tend to work one-to-one, where we spend over the course of a year, we meet regularly, so we can get quite deeply into stuff. And what I always say is that it's a matter of personality, and there are some people who need to plan out their book before they write it. They need to have a map, and they need to follow that map and think about it, intellectualize it, strategize, and then work their way through it. And that's totally legitimate. And then there are some people like me who, if I try to do that, I can't really think of a plot in the abstract. It just doesn't work like that for me. And B, if I do come up with something, it immediately bores me. If I was to try and plan it all out, I would not want to write it. And so in some ways, I think telling people like me, giving them that message is really liberating. Yes. People realize, oh my God, it's okay. I don't need to be able to think of a plot. And I think for years, I didn't write novels. I wrote nonfiction and journalism. And I think one of the main reasons that I was too scared to try and write a novel was that I thought, well, I can't think of a plot. So I think it is quite liberating for some people to know that it's about exploration and character. And then later you start to really kind of knuckle down to the plot.
When you first moved from writing for newspapers as a literary critic into writing, what was the thing that scared you most much about reading one of your first reviews?
Everything about reading your first review is terrifying. I don't know whether I'm unique in that I had written so many reviews before I read my first one. Maybe the level of terror I experienced was higher because I knew how bad it could get. It gave me early on in my career as a critic, I was in my 20s. I was much more brutal, and and I wrote things for laughs, and and was much more thoughtless about the way that I reviewed. And as I've got older, before I even started writing fiction, I think I matured and became much more measured and realized, my God, even if I don't like this book, this person has spent however many years writing it. So I've become much kinder. And then writing my own novels, I think I've become even kinder as a reviewer. And I'm not sure that, to be honest, I'm not sure that makes me a brilliant reviewer, because really good reviewers let rip and tell you everything in brutal terms that's wrong with the book. And I haven't been able to, for about 20 years, I haven't been able to do that. But it's uniquely terrifying. It's still terrifying seeing reviews, although I think now I'm much better at having a distance from it, and I don't read any of my Amazon reviews, good or bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, but whereas newspaper reviews, I will probably, if I see one, I'll just have to read it. But
yeah, I must admit, I've been doing it for 6 years now, and I'm finding it harder and harder to be as critical as I was when I started.
I think there are good ways, aren't there? There are ways that you can convey
Yeah.
your reservations without being brutal.
Yeah.
I could turn my phone off, shouldn't I?
That's all right. At least with your phone being on, at least you can check the internet's working, I suppose.
That's true.
Yes.
But it is. That's good.
Yeah. When you were looking at some of your earlier books, I saw that you'd written from other countries like Canada and stuff. So what was it like doing the research and things for other countries? Because I know you've been an academic in other countries too.
Well, I wasn't actually an academic. I lived in America twice, but that was because my husband was working in America, so I just went along for the ride.
Yeah.
So I lived in Seattle for a while, and then my first novel was set in the Pacific Northwest, and I wrote it after I'd left, a few years after I'd left. But I think I wrote it, set it there because I loved it so much and I wanted to be back there. So that was really what drew me to set the whole book there, and I got very interested in killer whales and the research that people do in the Pacific Northwest, and this story of this one of the first female killer whale researchers out there, which was actually based on a true story that I read in a magazine when I lived in Seattle. And then I wrote my second novel about Boston, where I had been living. And again, that was because I was missing Boston and I wanted to sort of inhabit it for a bit longer. So I think that's I often choose a setting because it's somewhere that I want to be.
Do you think it's important that you inhabit where you've written? Because after just read Magpie Lane, I can tell that you live in Oxford because of all the detail you go into.
Yeah, actually, Oxford was the exception to that rule because it wasn't. I didn't set it there because I wanted to be there, because I am there, and I'm actually. Funnily enough, Magpie Lane has made me love Oxford in a way that I didn't before I wrote it. I actually slightly hated it before I wrote Magpie Lane. But I think discovering all of this stuff about Oxford and really immersing myself in Oxford made me really appreciate it in a way that I hadn't before. But I think it's really, for me, it's key, the location. You have to really believe it and inhabit it and feel it physically and know what it looks like and smells like, and because if you want your reader to go along with you and live in that place too, they've got to believe that they are there, and they've got to be able to visualize it. So sometimes I'll read novels that I don't feel that the place has come alive, and I think that sort of takes away a layer of interest.
Yeah. What made the ghost parts come alive for you in the story? Because that's a large part of the background essence of the book.
Yeah, there is a very spooky and unsettling theme going on in this 400-year-old house, and really, what I want it to be is up to you as a reader whether you believe there's a ghost or not a ghost. So you've got the nanny and the child who live in these attic rooms. They've been sort of shoved upstairs to the attic, and these attic rooms contain this priest's hole, which is incredibly creepy, and they hear things in the night, and you're never really sure, is it the child, is it the nanny, who's wandering around, is anyone wandering around? And really, for me, all of that is a projection of their inner turmoil and anxiety and fear and need and loss and grief, and they're projecting a lot of this stuff. But of course, they're also living in an incredibly creepy attic in an incredibly creepy house, and And I love all of that. I think all of that's really fun to write.
I think it really did work, especially with the priest hole. Are there any books you've read in the past with priest holes in them that inspired you to include a priest hole in the book?
Well, the priest hole was actually a real priest hole. So I was shown around the president's lodging of one of the colleges by a new president, and he showed me this whole creepy big house, which is what the Magpie Lane house is based on. This house, and in this house there is a priest's hole, and his priest's hole was downstairs in the kitchen, and was really small, was sort of the size of a small closet or something, where the priest would just crouch and hope that nobody would notice him. And so I moved, in my imaginary president's lodging, I moved this priest hole to the attic, and I made it a bit bigger so that the nanny and the child could just about fit in there together. So yeah, I think it wasn't based on a book, although I did do a bit of research about priest holes and what they involved.
Well, what made me ask that was the fact that I've now seen the priest hole in like 3 or 4 historical books.
Which books have you seen?
I think it was the Honey and the Sting was another one with the priest hole in it.
Oh. Well, they're irresistible, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, you can't get creepier than an ancient priest's hole.
Yeah. What is it that makes them so creepy for you? Because they are scary.
I think what made it so creepy, apart from the obvious physical thing that's kind of full of spiders and it's dark and it's uncomfortable and it's hidden. What makes it so alarming for me is these stories of the original priest hole. So they would sometimes make the priest hole, they make it look like a wall, so it was invisible. When you walk around the house, you'd never know, or it would be under the floorboards, hidden under a piece of furniture. So you'd never know, as you were walking around the inside of a house, you'd never know that the priest hole was there. But the priest hunters who would come, they were called the poursuivants, and they would come round, they were sent to find the priests, and they would measure the footprint of the house from the outside and then measure the footprint of the house from the inside. And with these calculations, they'd figure out, okay, these 2 measurements don't tally, that's where the priest hole is, and they'd go back in. And then, of course, if there's this priest cowering inside this priest hole, he'd be taken out and tortured and murdered. So the idea of what it would be like to be a priest crouched in one of these tiny spaces while people were walking around tapping on the walls and knocking on doors and measuring things to try and figure out where you are. I think that level of terror is just unfathomable.
Definitely.
So, that's going to leave echoes, that's going to leave shadows on a house.
Yeah. What was it about selective mutism that you found? Did you find that difficult to research, or was it crazy?
I was really interested in selective mutism. I knew a child who was selectively mute, and what I was really interested in was, you have this idea from films and things that a child is perfectly normal, something traumatic happens, and then they stop speaking for years. And that's actually, that level of traumatic mutism is really rare. And actually often it's just something that's gradual and is, it's the child's response to feeling anxious in the world. But it can be misinterpreted horribly, particularly at school, where teachers just say, just speak, and then they get traumatized by adults being furious with them that they won't speak. And I really like that. I really like that as a potential way that a child could be really damaged by not being understood, that they can't speak and no one can understand the fact that they don't speak, and see that as a rebellion or a stubbornness when actually it's fear. And I loved the idea that my nanny, who is in other ways rebellious and awkward, would instantly really understand that this child is frightened and isn't speaking because she's being stubborn, but because she can't actually get the words to come out of her mouth.
The fact that she couldn't speak was a really important key element with the relationship with the stepmother. What made you decide to make that relationship such a key part of the book?
I suppose I wanted, so the stepmother she's Scandinavian, and she's young, and she's very beautiful, and she's pregnant, and she has sort of inherited this child that she wants to mother. She wants to be a good stepmother, and it really upsets her that she can't connect with this child. But she's also sort of slightly hates Felicity because she won't speak, and she can't understand why this child won't speak to her, and she in a way becomes abusive, but not because she's abusing her deliberately, but because she just cannot connect with her. And I really like that. I actually feel a bit for Mariah, who's a bit of a villain, but she's plunged into this world of, she's in this house where she's got a child who can't speak to her and a nanny who is obstreperous and difficult. And she's also been plunged into an Oxford college who all think she's stupid. All of the academics think she's stupid and airhead and ditzy. And she's also trying to run her own business, which she's a wallpaper restorer and into layers of history. And I sort of felt like that's, as a woman, that's actually a really difficult position she's in. It's not really her fault that she's so hopeless.
Wallpaper historian is a very different angle to a book as like a job, and there's a lot of like poison and things in the background to that. What made you choose that as a background job for Miranda?
It's actually funny, I'm realising I've got a bit of a theme on my ideas. This was another magazine article I read. I read an article about a wallpaper historian who restores ancient wallpapers and puts them back to their kind of former glory. And because I was looking at themes within this house of all the layers of history and what went before, I thought it would be really interesting to have this kind of not ancient, but this old wallpaper that's precious and that's on the walls, and that this wallpaper restorer is really interested in and wants to restore. And along the way, we find fragments of wallpaper elsewhere in the house, as you do. And of course, because Mariah, the stepmother, is really interested in this, she's peeling off bits of wallpaper everywhere she goes and finding some wallpaper that potentially has arsenic dye in it, which is poisonous. So it was just a really interesting job. Yeah. And I was really fascinated by how that actually, that whole world, how that works, but also, of course, it's kind of thematic gold.
Yeah, it definitely fits with the tone of the book. But the thing that I found fascinating was the way that you used the police interviewers at the start of each chapter to illustrate that the story was moving on. What made you decide to do that?
That again it wasn't really a conscious decision to do that. It just emerged. I began to realise I was trying to include the police questions in order to sort of spark Dee's memories. And it was only really towards the end of writing that I realised that these questions could be used to structure the whole book. So the whole book is really a police interview. It's a one long police interview, and they ask a question, and that sparks her thoughts. And I kind of like the way that it gave her opportunity to think all this stuff and then say 3 words to the police. So she's actually being really obstreperous with the police by not telling them stuff, but she's telling us, because we're inside her head, we're getting all of these thoughts. But also we're seeing that there's a lot she's not saying. And of course that theme of what's not said, I thought was I was really interested in what's not said and why that's more powerful often than what is said.
Once you'd worked out that arc that you wanted the police to like move the story, did it change at all?
I had to do a lot of work late on in the writing to tighten it all up and to make those questions follow each other, structure, as if that really was a conversation. I had to tweak things a lot and rewrite what the police were asking her and things like that, because the sort of bulk of the chapter in writing came before the police's question. So I would often retrospectively have to go back and think, well, what question would they have asked in order to get that answer? And then change everything. And there was a lot of fiddling around with timeframes and moving things. It became quite a massive headache at one point.
Would you say that that's the biggest headache you've had over the 4 books you've written, or was there a book or a part in this one that was worse?
This was definitely the hardest. I did get to a point with The Night Visitor where I felt completely lost and bamboozled by my own plot and couldn't figure out what I was doing, and I couldn't hold it all in my head. With my first 2 books, I was able to hold them all in my head. And then, there was about 3/4 of the way through The Night Visitor, I thought, I've lost control. I don't know, I can't understand what this plot is or what's happening. And that was the same with Magpie Lane, only more intense and for longer. But you get there. I think that what I learned is that you get there eventually. If you keep working for long enough and hard enough, you get there eventually.
I first came across you in Magpie Lane thanks to Noah at the bar and you reading the book out. Do you like to read your books out in public, or is that something you generally avoid?
I hate reading my book in public, because actually one of the reasons I hate reading it anyway, because I don't really like that idea of sort of standing up with everyone looking at me while I read something. But also, I do find myself wanting to change things all the time.
Yeah. What would you say that you would, having done that, read the books, is there anything that you would want to change in your earlier books, or maybe even this, or or the one that's coming after reading it?
Yeah, I think most writers feel like this, that you would probably scrap or rewrite pretty much everything that has ever been published under your name. I would anyway. Like, if someone gave me, certainly my first 2 novels, if somebody gave them back to me now with a red pen, I'd go wild.
Given that your 3rd book has been option for TV, is there anything that you would want to make sure that they keep in the book and not take it out?
I think I'm very attached, in The Night Visitor, I'm very, very attached to Vivian, who is my beetle expert. And I think if they attempted to make Vivian in any way glamorous or appealing, I would find that really difficult. On the other hand, I think when somebody's making your book into TV, probably the route to sanity is just to step back and let them get on with it.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with me anymore. Pocket the cash and laugh.
Your next book is, how long does it take you generally to write one? And with this being a paperback, I imagine you're quite a way into the next book, if not already finished it.
No, I haven't finished it, unfortunately. I'm as I said, I'm getting slower and slower at writing. I think the pandemic definitely slowed me up with this book as well. And I'm probably going to take about another year to finish it. I've been writing it for about 18 months, 2 years maybe. So I reckon I've got another year of, or maybe 9 months.
Well, given the ups and downs that I've been doing my own writing, I know that you can plan to start writing something and then get slower. what would you say has been the hardest part of the writing process for you?
For the book I'm writing now, or generally?
The book you're writing now first, and then generally.
I think that actually the hardest thing, well, there's two things. One is all my young adult children suddenly being back at home and in the house, and that definitely got in my headspace. I need to feel like I can shut the door and have peace and quiet. And that, for the first lockdown, or first two lockdowns, that was a nightmare. And then I've also realised that one of the things I do when I'm procrastinating or fiddling around or trying not to work, which is most of the time, what I tend to do is go to a library or go to a cafe, and then I will work really productively for a couple of hours. So that was my way to kind of give myself a kick up the arse, was to say, right, you're faffing around on the internet again, just go to the cafe, and then I would work. But of course, with all the lockdowns, the libraries are shut, the cafes are shut, it's just me, so I think I did a lot of procrastinating that I might not otherwise have done.
Yeah, I know the feeling, and because I'm writing with somebody else as well, it's not like.
Are you? Isn't that better though, that you've got someone who you're accountable to? So
it is, yeah, it is. Who do you get to read? Who do you get to be the final reader of your book before? Yeah.
My agent is always a really good reader. She's a great sort of critical reader. She doesn't really do the structural stuff, but she's just a really good, intelligent reader. So she'll give me her reaction to what I've read. She'll say, I didn't believe it when this happened, or that character seems really pointless, or I think that plot line didn't make sense to me. And I find that really useful. And then I've got sort of various people I call on. I think I've been thinking that I need to build a better group of people who I can read their work and they can read my work. Because actually I think I always end up feeling a bit like, I'm going to beg somebody to read it, and the poor person is going to have to do me this massive favor. So I think I need to work on having maybe 3 or 4 alpha readers, or are they beta readers? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Whatever the term is. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because I have to dictate on my work, so none of it's private. What's the hardest thing for you about maybe not revealing it to someone, or do you like that?
I do find that I mustn't reveal it to anyone for ages. I can't bear talking about it for a really long time. I have to get the characters. I think for me it's about, once I've found the characters and I really know who they are, I can just about start talking about it a bit with some people. I'm good friends with Mick Herron, the Slough House author. You're probably all very familiar with him.
Yeah.
And he's a good friend of mine, and I talk to him a lot about my work. He doesn't really need to talk about his work. He talks in general terms about his work, and I talk in really specific terms to him about my work. And he's incredibly good at pinpointing weaknesses, and he's really well read. So he's a good person to talk to generally about how the book is working or not working, or problems I'm having with it. So I find him invaluable. And Amanda Jennings is another one. She's a friend of mine, and she's a really good sort of critical person to talk to about plot and things. In fact, she was massively instrumental in the ending of Magpie Lane. Without her, Magpie Lane would have a really shit ending.
Well, the ending to her last book was quite amazing. I thought, quite different to what I was expecting.
She's good.
Yeah. What was it about that book and that because you must discuss books between you. Did you really enjoy that book? And
I think Amanda's got a real. I know this is a terrible admission, but I don't read that much crime and suspense. I tend to read sort of literary fiction mostly. So, but what I do find with Amanda's books is that she's got a sort of magical storytelling quality that all really good writers have. That thing that where you just fall in love with her story, and it doesn't really matter where she's going because you're going to follow her. And I think that's a kind of all writers I love have that magical quality, and it's really hard to pinpoint what it is, but it's something really special. And I really think that Amanda's got that. She's got a really beguiling storytelling voice.
Yeah, and for anyone that wants to know more about that book as well, the interview with her is in the archives somewhere on the group. So enjoy and have a look. Is there anyone that's coming up in the festival season with the festival, new people that you spotted, or because if you don't generally read crime and thrillers, who are you reading at the moment?
I'm not going to be much use to you. I'm reading at the moment. I'm just reading a lot of various things. I'm currently reading reading the new book by Elif Shafak, who's she was shortlisted last year for the Booker, and she's got a new novel out which I've just started reading. And I think I like reading. I mean, it's not that I don't read crime. I do, but it's just not my main. It's not my main thing. And I think I just like reading good writing. So I don't really care what genre it is or who's written it, or if it's good, I'll read it and love it.
Is there any genre that you would like to have a go at that you've not had a look at doing yet?
Writing or reading?
Writing it.
I've got a little part of me that thinks I might want to write something historical. I love Sarah Waters. She's one of my kind of heroine writers. I just think she's so good, and she writes historical fiction. And I don't normally read that much historical fiction, but when I read her books, I just think they're unbelievably good. And I think there might be a part of me that thinks that might be interesting to give that a go one day.
I think I'd be scared of historical fiction about trying to get it right and wrong all the time.
Exactly, you have to do a lot of research.
Yeah. When you were researching the historical side of Oxford, was there anything that you wanted to include that you didn't have space to?
Oh, there's tons. I think there's so much gets left out. Before I even start writing, I spend a few months really just reading crazy stuff in the Bodleian Library that doesn't make it into the book, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm interested in. And I always think there are little germs of novels everywhere, and they could easily spread.
When you're going around the Bodleian Library, what is it about the Bodleian Library and the historical side of Oxford that you think has attracted so many writers to write about Oxford?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a part. I think when you're talking about the university, it's this incredibly intense environment. The colleges are little self-governing universes, people governed by extraordinarily clever nitpickers who often have enormous egos. Not always. Some of my very best friends are Oxford academics and they don't fall into this category, but there's a portion of Oxford academics that are sort of psychopathic and truly believe that they are cleverer and more right than anyone else. And they're trying to govern these colleges cooperatively. I mean, occasionally it bursts into the national news because they've all gone completely and utterly mad and are ripping each other apart. And I think that claustrophobic sort of simmering pot of madness is catnip for writers, isn't it? It is for me anyway.
What was that? What was the decision to make the master an ex-BBC controller is that an essence of what we were just talking about? Or
Yeah, I mean that's really about the sort of new Oxford, the new university is all about money raising and public image and bringing this kind of crazy ancient institution into the 21st century. And a lot of the people who are now being hired to be the masters and the presidents of these colleges come from industry, media. They're kind of people who are well connected and know how to run something dynamic and modern. But of course, you're putting those people into this environment where a portion of people in this environment will have basically kind of gone to public school, gone to Oxford, stayed there. You know, they're horrified by anything as vulgar as raising money, and they resist things. And I found that clash between this sort of modernizing president and the nest of vipers that he's trying to control. I think I'd like to write more about that. I didn't get to write enough about it, really.
Do you think there's a sense of clash between town and gown that you could write about in another book too?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in Magpie Lane. I was really interested in people who are kind of have almost one foot in both, but they're not town, but they're not gown either. There's this whole portion of people in Oxford that are sort of connected to the university, but sort of not, which is me as well. I'm a teacher at the university, but I'm not really part of the college. I'm not really involved in the nitty-gritty of Oxford life. But then I'm town, and I've got children and they go to school, but I'm neither one nor the other, really.
Yeah. The small background characters like the cleaners and the porters in Oxford. In your experience of being in that environment, how much was your own experience inform the characters in that book? In the book,
I do like the sort of disruptive potential of the characters, the sort of, you know, the cleaners and the catering staff and the people who, and the nannies, you know, the people who are in these houses observing these people doing their rituals and going about their glamorous lives, and how they can sort of puncture the pretension and see it for what it is, and see under the exterior, they can see the workings of this stuff. And because they're coming in and out, and often they're completely ignored or dismissed by the people that they're watching. And that's a great fictional material, isn't it?
It really does allow for the complex background of because there's a lot of the little B stories. That what was the most complex bit about writing as a nanny with the main character for the book?
It's complex, but I think I didn't find it very complicated, because I think it's just you can have a lot of fun when you've got this. Yeah. You've got this outsider who's inside that, you know, she's there all the time. She's eating the same food as them. She's watching them have arguments, and she's overhearing things every time she walks past their bedroom door. And it gives so much scope for observing this glamorous couple, what they're really like, what's really going on. That actually I didn't find that part of writing it difficult. It was really fun doing it from the nanny's perspective.
Because she had lots of other families she worked for before those characters. The small characters that are only going to be background characters. What would you say to someone that was trying to build those characters up? What advice would you?
I think there's a fine balance when you're doing these minor characters. You have to make them real, and you have to make us believe them, the peripheral characters. But if you allow them to get too real, then they start to take over, and the reader starts to expect something of them. And if you don't deliver, then the reader's confounded and think, well, what's happened to them? So I actually had, in early drafts of Magpie, I had this brilliant gardener character who was really kind of anarchic and resentful, and I loved him. I absolutely loved him. I could picture him, and he played a bit of he has a tiny part in it now, but he was way bigger. And eventually I had to cut him right back because he was kind of taking over, but the book wasn't his book. It wasn't about him, and he was just distracting from stuff. So I had to really slash him back down to size. And I think that's my advice for writers, is be really careful with your characters, your peripheral characters, that they don't start kind of holding up flags saying, look at me, and then the reader looks at them and they don't do anything.
Yeah, because he was the guy that came in and found the cat, wasn't
he? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he makes an appearance. He pops up here and there, and he is resentful. But he was way bigger then in early drafts than he is now.
Yeah.
I feel a bit sad, actually. I'd forgotten about him, but I feel a bit sad that I had to get rid of him to such an extent. Maybe he's going to have his own book at some point.
Well, there's a possibility for that, because as you've discovered with the layers you could put with the nanny character, small characters can have bigger backgrounds that you don't realise. When you were building up the arc of the story, and having to go back into the police element, at what point did you feel comfortable revealing points to the reader?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about that without giving away any of it.
Yeah.
But I think there is in a mystery like Magpie Lane, it's a really fine. You have to calibrate it just right, that you reveal things just at the right time. And if you get it wrong, I think it can really throw the book in the wrong direction. If you reveal something too soon, you lose interest, you lose the pace. But if you wait too long, the reader starts to feel like you're manipulating them. So it's really, I'm not sure that I even know now what, I think it's a lot of it is about a writer's intuition of when does the reader need to know all of these different little bits of information in order for them to have the maximum impact. And I think you have to play around a bit actually with that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for telling us so much about the book, and I hope that people will see this and go out and buy the paperback. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. I'm just gonna turn it off live now, and then it's not gone off yet. I'm not doing it.